Hi, welcome to the video series, Why is Change So Hard? Whether or not you've been to counseling before, there are several things to know that will actually maximize your experience, and it'll help you get the most out of counseling. I'd love the opportunity to walk through some of this valuable information with you, even before you go to your first Tricord counseling session. Now, you may have already been to counseling, and I hope that was, for you, a positive experience, but sometimes clients inform me that they've had a negative experience previously in counseling. I would encourage you to consider that there may have been some positive takeaways even from a negative experience. Now, if this is your first time with counseling or even with Tricord, you can gain some awareness with some helpful tips that will serve you long after our work together has concluded. Believe me when I tell you, this information is going to prove very helpful to you in the counseling process. Counseling requires you to honor the process of change. Now, I want you to think about this. Imagine that when you go to make a change, there are various stages that you have to go through in order to complete the process. That's what I would like to go through with you. There's been a lot of research on change, and in fact, there's like at least 5 stages. I'd like to share 4 of them with you in the first video, and then what we'll do in the second video is we'll look at the last stage of change, and then we'll consider why this information is important and hopefully how it can be helpful to you. Okay, so if you're ready, hope you have your file downloaded and your pen and paper ready to take some notes, because I want to share some great stuff with you. The first stage of change, it's really a layer of unawareness. It's called before I either knew or cared. Now, this is kind of the mindset of, I have no idea what you're talking about. In other words, sometimes we might need to make a change in our lives, and the people come to us and maybe share that with us, the people closest to us, and quite literally, our unawareness is so huge that that's kind of our response. The level of awareness here is almost zero. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for this. It could be that there's willful blindness. Maybe you're too distracted to see what they're talking about. It could be pride. Maybe you're too focused on other people's faults. I mean, it's likely that you used to be here. If you're here right now, you're probably not in the first phase. Now, other people may have pointed out to you that there was a need for change, and you ignored them, you dismissed it, or maybe you even denied what they were saying. But by now, you're here, you're watching this video, you're ready to make some changes, and at least you're at some new level of awareness. Stage 1 is basically before you had any awareness that anything needed to change at all. Now, obviously, this is a frustrating phase for the people around you. They may have even thought you were in the next phase of change, which is actually harder, and we'll get to that in a little bit. When someone is asking you to make a change and you don't even see what they're talking about, that's very frustrating. But let's talk for a little bit about phase 2. Phase 2 is it's awareness without action. It's after I knew, but before I cared. Now, at some point in the change process, you start to gain levels of awareness, and you even acknowledge the possibility that the people around you are right, or maybe they have been right for a while. But this is important. Just because you agree that there needs to be a change, it doesn't mean that you're ready to do it. So, during this stage, people say stuff like, okay, you're right, I need to make a change. Or they might even make promises like, I promise I will get some help. Or they might make some promise about something in the future. Well, once I get through this, then I'll start working on that and get some help. The problem is all these words are just words, and until you actually begin to get the help that you need, people are not going to believe you. During this phase, you frustrate people more than any other phase. Well, why? Why would that be? Think about that. If you know something, but you don't care yet enough to make a move, imagine how that makes the people around you feel. Stop and think about that. I mean, if this is where you are, I have a question for you. How long have you been in this phase? Phase 2 is a seedbed for resentment. Ponder that for a minute. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not too late. It doesn't mean that if you've been there for a while that there's just no hope. There is, but it's important to know that before you begin the process of counseling, that results might take a little while to show up, and this may be part of the reason why. I'll address this a little bit later on in the video, but let's just kind of put a pin in it for now, okay? Now that you've made a move towards getting the help, that you've demonstrated a level of care, it might take a while for credibility to show up. So in the next video, we'll talk about why that's important, why staying in phase 2 for too long is not a good idea, right? So phase 1 is I neither knew nor cared. Phase 2 is, okay, I now know, but I don't yet care enough to do anything about it. Phase 3 is making a move forward. In other words, I now care enough to prepare for change. Now, change actually is the next step, but before change happens, there is a preparation period. This is often where I meet people. What people don't appreciate is that there's a lot of messy relational stuff that can happen before you get to phase 3. I mean, when I'm working with couples, they just assume that as soon as they begin counseling, we just kind of jump right into phase 3, but they don't realize that oftentimes we have to clean up what I call a phase 2 mess. And it can just be that phase of I know, but I don't care yet enough to do something about it lasted a little longer than it should have. Again, doesn't mean it's too late, but you have to honor in phase 3 that there may be some things you have to back up and deal with. So, essentially, if you're in that phase 2 too long, you end up with a credibility issue, and you do not want to ignore the challenges ahead. Here are some common phrases because of that dynamic. Here are some phrases you might hear in phase 3. Well, I've heard that for years. Oh, I see what you're doing, but I'm not convinced that it's going to last. Listen, we've been through this cycle many times before. Why is this different? Now, I'm sorry for the sarcastic tone, but that's often how I hear that in phase 3 when people are really trying to make preparation for change. You have to acknowledge that some of those old feelings are still in play. It's a good thing when you get to phase 3, it is. But phase 2 messes have to be cleaned up first. They have to at least be acknowledged. Acting like there are no consequences from a prolonged phase 2 experience is cruel and unreasonable. That's important. I hope you wrote that down. Waiting too long can be cruel and unreasonable, and thinking that that doesn't have to be dealt with is, I think, sometimes impossible. So let's talk about some realities in phase 3, okay? What exactly happens during that I now care enough to make a move forward in this preparation phase? What kind of things are you preparing to do? Well, number 1, you're preparing to listen, not just talk. Active listening skills, if you've not taken a course, it would be a good idea. You know, the idea of listening to understand rather than listening to react. In other words, when someone's talking, you're trying to hear what they say rather than thinking about what you're going to say. That's part of the preparation phase. It might be that you need some tips and tools. I have another video series called Hope for My Marriage, and we go through a lot of those very important tools and tips and strategies and intervention techniques that are very helpful that I go through with almost all the couples that I work with. You're welcome to check that out if you want to, but that's a part of that learning phase. You're also preparing for some personal awareness. That's something else that you're learning. In other words, you're learning how to present information, how to receive information. You're learning what was said and how it was said. You're also preparing to, this is fun, get uncomfortable. I mean, who likes to be uncomfortable, right? But understand, in the change process, that awkwardness is an important, and I would even say a necessary part of it. If you're not uncomfortable, there's probably not a lot of change going on. Think about that. I mean, when you learn to write, if you've forgotten what it feels like to learn to write, just start writing with the opposite hand and you'll be taken right back to that moment. Learning to drive a car, your first day on the job, we understand these dynamics, that learning something for the first time means there's a learning curve. In fact, the hardest phase is probably phase 3 because it's the steepest learning curve yet. Remember that you're becoming aware of phase 2 messes that need to be addressed as you're learning how to navigate the challenges of interacting with people and actually learning to listen. So, this preparation phase, be patient with yourself, be patient with the people around you. You can't rush this, because if you do, it's not likely that whatever you learn will remain. So, something else. You'll be challenged to try some new things that you may not want to do. You'll be challenged to try in counseling things like, we've mentioned active listening. How about a change of perspective? Whenever there's a conversation, there's your perspective, there's my perspective, there's our collective perspective. I mean, there's a lot of perspectives going on here. It's not just mine. You're going to learn new tools, new skills. You're going to receive some good information. You know, one of the favorite phrases I hear from people in my office? That's a really good question. Either they've thought it before and couldn't come up with it, or they haven't considered it. And either way, it gets you thinking and it gets you learning, and it helps you engage deeper in the change process. One more thing is that there's new lifestyle adjustments. I mean, something as simple as coming home early, maybe taking on a better self-care routine. How about maybe sitting down as a family at the end of the day and having family dinners, parenting style adjustments, all this stuff. This, again, it's the hardest phase because the learning curve is at its steepest. So, learning about what these changes are and how to go about them leads us to this last, it's not the last stage, but it's the fourth stage of change, and that's action. Phase 4. In other words, I care enough to make change a reality. This is what I call making the right moves. We're not just making a move. Now we're zoning in on some very specific things. See, phase 3 and 4 actually run together, because the best way to learn anything is to apply what you're learning while you're learning it. You know, the least productive counseling is when I think people have been in 3 or 4 sessions and they're asked the question, did you try to apply what we've talked about? And their answer time after time is, no, I didn't have time, or we didn't make time, or I forgot. It's the least productive type of counseling, because, again, when you apply what you're learning while you're learning it, that's how change is optimized. And I really hope for you that this experience will be just that. It'll be an optimized learning experience. Now, there may be deeper issues involved. Most of the time, it's just fear of change, or maybe even lack of immediate results. I don't know if you've ever tried to teach yourself something that's kind of hard, like playing guitar. If you've ever tried something that complicated, that difficult, it's actually quite amazing. If you tried to teach yourself guitar, you'd be amazed if you push through some of those early learning experiences of just being able to deal with the painful fingers and the dexterity issues. And truth be told, if you just learn 2 or 3 chords, you could play a song, and it's like it just opens up a new world of possibilities for you. Well, that's kind of what we're doing here. We're going to explore into a new world of possibilities. We're going to do some things that are new, maybe a little bit challenging for you, for people around you, but you can do it. And if you honor the change process and you're not fooled by the results or the lack of results, I believe that you'll discover that they will come. So phase 4, that action stage, means, here's the thing, it means you've already made it through the first 3 stages. Now, you've not necessarily completed them as such, but you've gotten through them to the point where you're ready to start applying some of the things that you're learning. And it may not be a bad idea for you to treat yourself at that point, to give yourself some kind of incentive that lets you know that I'm coming along here. Let me give you a reminder before we wrap up this first video. If you were in phase 2 too long, you may continue to experience consequences, unforgiveness, lack of trust, resentment, hurt feelings. You may experience some of those phase 2 consequences well into phase 4. This is what I call the waters of consequence under the bridge of change. As long as you continue to make changes and improvements over time, the waters of consequence will recede and trust will return. Okay, so we're going to wrap up this first video now. And we're going to give you a chance to go back over the notes that you've taken, hopefully, and think through those first 4 phases of change. In this next video, we're going to look at stage 5. And then we're going to start making a little more application, more practical application about why this is so important and how you can use this to your advantage. So again, People have shared with me throughout the years that they didn't get much out of counseling. My belief is that there was a readiness issue they may not have been aware of. In other words, perhaps you were in the right place but at the wrong time. It may be that you were more ready than you thought you were and that you tried to look at things before, but perhaps now you're in a better place and you're in a more ready place to change. If this is the first time that you've gone through counseling, then this information is golden, and it will help you be more realistic about what to expect in the process. It also may help you make some adjustments so that you can get the most out of the experience. All right, so if you're ready, let's move on to this next video and let's see why this information is potentially so useful to you.